I'm super excited for our speaker today. I have Michael Rogers. He's the CISO Director of Information Security and Compliance at Hormel Foods. In his role, he's responsible for leading information security and identity access management organizations. Previously, he worked with United Health Group and served as their business information security officer, where he was responsible for developing, managing, transforming information security team. Today, he's going to be speaking on incident replay and cyber incidents. He'll probably talk for about 45 minutes, and we're going to leave some time, about 15 minutes, for Q&A. Don't forget, if you have a question, wait for my tech team to come to you with the mic so my virtual audience can hear. And to my virtual audience out there, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat box, and my tech team will make sure that we get that question to our speaker. So everyone, let's welcome to the stage Michael Rogers.
Thank you. Hey everyone, thank you for having me. Can we just get another round of applause for FutureCon and Kim for putting on such a great event? I'm excited to be here. I'm going to move around a little bit, and today I've got a pretty good agenda, but first I'll introduce myself a little bit. I've been in IT for over 25 years now. I joined the field in Y2K. A few of us remember that, probably not that many, but I look out and see some smiles. I've been in information security since the late aughts, when the company I was working for at the time needed someone to understand NIST 800-53 to get federal compliance. My boss handed me 80 pages and said, hey, you should learn this. We need somebody to know it. This information security thing, it could be something someday. Greatest mistake ever, right? So here I am 15 years later. I got my MBA a handful of years ago, and when I went into that program, I had a handful of people say, an MBA, you're a cyber guy, what the heck's that gonna do for you? I think as we start to go forward through the presentation, we'll see that cyber risk is just business risk. It's business risk that a lot of people don't understand, but we have to speak the language of business. So I'm going to try to put it in those terms as we go forward. Just a quick disclaimer that the opinions and what I share today, point of view. So I'm not representing my company. They're supportive of me being here, but it's my point of view that I'm sharing today. So just want to be clear on that. So the agenda, I'm going to talk through a little bit of the business impact of cyber risk and cyber breaches. Is the microphone working okay? It fades out. Okay, thanks. So business impact first. I'm going to do a step-by-step breakdown of an event that we experienced. So personally, I went through this, and I'm going to break that down at a technical level and kind of go through the details. I'll share some key takeaways from that incident, what we learned, and then I'll close on some thoughts for improving our field and helping learn from each other as we go forward. If you have questions along the way, or if you have questions, please save them. I'm up here being vulnerable and want to share whatever I can with you guys, and we're all here to learn from each other, right? That's the best part of these events, is the learning from each other. So please, I encourage you to write down questions, to ask questions. All right. You guys have probably seen these numbers before, but last year, Clorox had a pretty massive ransomware incident. Over 300 million in damages. There was a news story yesterday that I was just reading about this, that they're still trying to recover market share from that incident. Their earnings are down this quarter from an incident that happened, I think 9 months ago, 8-9 months ago, right? Very real, and took down their production network, so you couldn't get your Clorox, your Pine Sol. I'm a big Burt's Bees guy. My wife makes me put it on all the time. So really big impact. UHG, I know, has been on everybody's mind. Massive, massive impact just over the last couple months, not just to UHG, but to the entire US healthcare system. We've still got clinics that are on the verge of filing for bankruptcy or going out of business because they can't get paid. So really big kind of follow-on effects from that breach. And then the casinos last year, right? One paid, one didn't, but massive business impacts. That 100 million quote on MGM, I believe, I think that's small. I have friends who were in the hotels. You couldn't get into your room. The slots were shut down, the sport books were shut down. That's a really big business, right? That's a really big impact. So the risk is real. This isn't FUD. When I came into security, it was like, oh, you got to patch your stuff or terrible stuff will happen. Well, what terrible stuff? It's bad, right? Now we're talking about real business impact, right? And we can put it into quantitative terms. It means something to a board of directors, to a CEO, when you say, hey, we're going to lose $356 million of a $7 billion annual revenue stream. That's a really big deal, right? So our executives are listening, and I'll harken back to this a little bit later, because it's our job to make sure that we're sharing the right message and we're doing the right things. Also, not trying to shame anybody with this. One of the best CISOs I've ever worked for, Robert Booker at UHG, used to say, everybody has a bad day. We're never going to mock them. We're never going to celebrate it, because it sucks to go through these things, right? When you're on the receiving end. So we all work for companies that compete against each other. Let's not compete on this, right? Let's get cyber right. I feel really strongly about that. So. And then just business risk, right? We have fire alarms and smoke or sprinklers, right? We all learn about them in our CISSP. We're protecting against a risk that is also quantifiable, and there are pretty predictable ways to do most of the basics. So getting those right? Just supply chain risk, right? Our companies have been working on this for 20 years, 30, 40 years. We're just newer to it, right? We're a newer discipline, and so we're not as advanced, but we're going to get there quick, is my prediction. Come on, thing. There we go. So our experience, October last year, I was notified that attackers had gained remote access to our network through a Citrix published application. If you've worked in IR, especially if you've sat in a CISO chair and you've been through this, it is a gut punch. I've received ransom notes from Russian gangs more than once, and gotten a call at 9 o'clock in the morning when I was in the bathroom fixing my hair, and it just, there's nothing that prepares you for this. I think just the emotion of going through the incident, and at this point, you don't know what you don't know. So the fog of war, I don't know if anybody played StarCraft. I'm also a gamer. I played StarCraft as a kid and always turned off fog of war. I want to see what the army's coming at me with, right? You don't know what you don't know. As I go through this, we have the benefit of hindsight. So there's a lot that I know, and there's a few things that I think looking back. So the details that I'm going to share, I'm sharing chronologically, but we didn't know them necessarily in that order, and you never do, right? You're always using scientific method to what do we know, what do we think, how do we prove or disprove those things we think, and then move on to the next step, all the while planning a recovery when you have a major incident. So I'm going to talk through our investigation. I think there was a string of vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, and I'll share here the general attack path. Now, if you're a red teamer and you see this, you're going to take 10 seconds looking at this, and you're going to be like, oh, yep, I know what all that stuff is. That's pretty obvious. If you're not an IR or you're not an offensive security person, it might be a little less obvious. So I'm going to break this down and actually talk in plain English about what was exploited to gain access to our network, and then I'm going to have some key takeaways about how you protect your network from those same things. So moving on. Here we go. I'm going to start with brute force. We did not fall prey to brute force, but I think it's good background to understand this, right? So when I think of brute force, I think of having a suitcase in front of you, and you do 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, try to open it. Nope, doesn't open. Okay, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, doesn't open. And you go through every possible combination on that piece of luggage until you get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's my luggage combination. That's brute force, right? You're just trying every possible combination until you get to the answer. And we used to be a lot more vulnerable to this, right? I just Googled, hey, what are the most common passwords in the world? Combined like 10 different lists and got this, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's actually the most common, add a digit, right? So these are all super predictable. And I think 15 years ago, we would have fallen prey to these passwords for a lot of people. So we got better, right? We put protections in place. So we made them more complex. Now you got to do, I had to change my password this morning, so I'm really familiar with this, right? At least 12 characters, maybe 15, depending on your org, right? So they're longer. Good, right? It's harder to brute force when it's long. Complexity, you got to have an uppercase, a lowercase, a number, I almost said an exclamation point, a special character, right? Okay, I'm not going to do password 123. I'm going to do password 123, bam, and make it more complex, right? So we introduced complexity, 90-day rotation. Let's change our passwords frequently, because then if somebody's trickling out a brute force attack, they can't get to the password before we change it. All right, super sensible, right? Account lockout on failed attempts, right? You try 5 times, you're locked out, you got to come back a half hour later or call the help desk to re-enable your account. And then lastly, we do the password reuse, right? You can't reuse one of the last 12 passwords you used. These are all really sensible, and they make a lot of sense in the context, the business context of where we were 10 years ago. And I'm not saying we should get rid of all this stuff, because we shouldn't. But what these have led to, I would argue, especially 90-day rotation plus complexity requirements, is different bad passwords. Springtime 2024, oh yeah, right? February 2024, exclamation, right? We're doing, because we're human and we have a hard time remembering stuff, we pick predictable patterns. So this makes us vulnerable to a different kind of attack. And if you mentioned password spray to me 5 years ago, I would have been like, I have no idea what that is. Now this is pretty common. So I'm going to talk through password spray, which is really just brute force on steroids. And that's what we got hit by. So what do you do for password spray? You get a whole bunch of usernames. Not that hard to do. I'll talk back to that in a couple slides, because we found out about this later. And you build a list of common passwords. Springtime 2024, fall time, right? All these different predictable combinations. You get 10,000 of them, right? And you build that list. And I'm oversimplifying, but only a little. And then you send those passwords at those usernames. So I do username 1, try 4 different passwords, none of them worked. Okay, username 2, same 4 passwords, none of them worked. 3, 4, 5, up to 1,000 users, right? However many account names I have for your network. So tons and tons of failed attempts. But by the time I get through 1,000 different usernames, I can go back at username 1 with 4 more passwords. And so I just script this attack until I find a hit. It's not that complicated, and now we see this happening all over the place. Here's what it looks like on a tiny map from an authentication standpoint on the day that this event occurred. And actually, I'm going to go to the next slide. I think we can reasonably guess from this map. This is the attack map that we were getting hit with from password attempts in the password spray from our threat intelligence tool. We're Minnesota-based, so you see a big chunk of green there. We got offices in California and a handful of other places. So where you see the green, those are actual attempts. Those are real users logging in. But you can see that they're proxying the password spray traffic through a bunch of different locations. But this is really just probably 1 or 2 people with a scripted attack that's bouncing around where it's hitting us from. Ultimately, they found 1 password that worked, and that's all it took. So then we go to MFA fatigue. What's that? I don't know if anybody's experienced this, MFA fatigue attacks. We ran into a couple of these with email accounts about 1.5 years ago. And basically what this is I have Authenticator on my phone, right? Doesn't matter if it's Google or Microsoft. Somebody gets my password. They send a password attempt. It pops up and says, hey, are you trying to log in right now? If so, approve it, right? Well, no, I'm not trying to log in. Deny. I don't want you logging in. That's not me. It pops up again. Hey, someone, are you trying to log in? You should approve this. No. Deny. Again and again. They basically DOS your phone. You can't do anything else on your phone. Deny. They're super persistent. Finally, in frustration, maybe you and I wouldn't do this. We'd call the help desk and say, hey, I need to reset my password right now. But an end user getting hit by this again and again and again, what did I got to do to make it go away? Approve. The bad guy has access to whatever it is they were trying to get into. Now they're in, right? That's the step. MFA fatigue is real. The second, what we actually were prey to is we have a couple locations where we don't allow mobile phones. If you drop a mobile phone into a vat of ground meat, that's really, really bad, right? So you can't get a mobile phone, but you do have an office with a landline, and you can do the same fatigue attacks with call me, and I'll click pound, right? I'll press pound on the keypad, and now you're in. Phone rings. Hey, are you trying to log in right now? No, I'm not. Hang up. Ring again and again and again. Pound. Stop. Bad guy's in, right? Now they've got access. So we've implemented, and I'll do this in my recap a little bit, but fatigue-resistant MFA is super important. Whether it's a hard token, I'm not recommending hard tokens, but if you can clip something to somebody's belt in that place where you can't drop a cell phone in a vat of meat, we've never had that happen. I just want to say that. We take food safety very, very seriously. But in those places, you have to find a different solution, right? So a small number of hard tokens, but your authenticator app, now when I log in on VPN, it's that, hey, are you trying to log in? If so, the number's 23, and I got to go back to my little thing and type in 23 and connect. That's super hard to hack, right? This is the reason your bank always says, we will never call and ask you for this code. Because if you get that code, and this is a big part of our training internally, if you get that code and you're not trying to log in, the only thing that could mean is a bad guy has your password, or somebody has your password. You need to change it right now. Every time. That's the only thing it means, right? If you take nothing else away from this, well, I got a couple other things too. So MFA fatigue, now they got access. What did they have access to? Office 365, the account portal. So what do they do from here? They go click and they add an MFA method and they type in a number that they control so that when they go log into the next thing with MFA, it texts them a 6-digit code. And they like, oh yeah, I got the code, right? Because the attacker just took access and configured their own MFA to your account. This is not a vulnerability. This is a design functionality that was exploited to help basically spread or gain access to something else, but something to be super aware of. You can, I believe, put some pretty strong policies in place on, hey, don't let users add their own MFA methods. So something else to be aware of. So once they have access, where do they go from here? Citrix. So they go log into Citrix. We have a Citrix portal with the MFA that they just added. So it was a well-controlled Citrix portal. Some stuff in the news lately about account compromise with single-factor authentication to Citrix, right? I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but you can bypass most of the advanced stuff that I just did here if you have single-factor authentication. In this case, they got access to a published application that controls some stuff on a shop floor. By using the file print option, it pops up the dialog of where do you print, and you say, I want to print a PDF, and you say save as, it gives you a file explorer. You can run a command prompt from there and start browsing and looking for directories and find your way around. So print function, there's other ways to break out, right? But published app breakout in Citrix, now they can start to spread further and look for other things. So what they were able to do from there is actually find a text file that had credentials in it for a privileged account and begin to move laterally. So this is all pretty straightforward, right? It punches me in the gut to share this, but probably a lot of us are vulnerable to a similar attack path, and people are using it. So what do we do about it? I'll get to that. I'm going to stop here. As you can imagine, I can't talk about fallout from any incidents, and I'm lucky that they let me share this much. So from here, what do we do, right? Key takeaways. I'll share this. So I had strong passwords on here, and I'm going to skip that because I think we should all be doing that. I'm just going to make an assumption that everyone's got their Active Directory or equivalent configured to enforce long, complex passwords, right? That's table stakes, so I'm going to speak to it even though it's not on here. Phishing-resistant MFA on every remote access technology. Phishing-resistant MFA on every remote access technology. You have to have it, right? Whether it's your VPN, your Office 365, your Citrix, any kind of remote access, you have to have this. My team doesn't know it yet. My core security team does, but I'm fairly confident that we don't have this, but I'm going to make a standing offer to buy lunch for anybody who finds a remote access technology in my company, and a nice lunch at that doesn't have MFA, that doesn't have phishing-resistant MFA. It's just so critical. Whatever it takes to accomplish this, we must do this, right? Super important. Threat hunting. So one of the things that we're implementing now is, and we're not doing a bounty yet internally for this, but I believe that rewards motivate people, right? Pretty obvious. Hunting for password files. Are there text files that have passwords on the network? Of course there are. Let's go find them. Let's get rid of them, right? And make everybody responsible for that. And so crowdsourcing a bit of security on that. When I say this is basic threat hunting, I know that we've got some people who've done advanced threat hunting in the room because I've talked to them this morning. But a little bit stronger is weak passwords. Well, how do you detect weak passwords? We're partnering with our Active Directory, with our domain admins, and actually doing hash comparisons. So we're going to take our own list of 1,000 weak passwords. We're going to pre-compute the hashes, and we're going to compare it to our NT, the DIT file, right, in Active Directory, and look for people who are using weak passwords, and use that as an opportunity to provide additional training to those people, right? There's no scolding, there's no shaming. They're following the rules. They just don't recognize that the rules can be exploited against them, right? And we need to do a little bit better. So if your password is springtime 2024 and you work in my company, we're going to be really nice. We're going to contact you and say, hey, just want you to know, you might want to consider changing your password to, now the only one that comes in mind is that I changed my password to this morning, so I'm not going to tell you guys, right? I personally like sentences, right? Ride to work every day. That was an old one that I used to use, right? I used to ride my bike to work every day when I lived closer to work. Nobody would ever guess that, right? I had some stuff about a 1969 Firebird. I used to have one of those. You might guess that, but probably not in the order and with the complexity that I built into it to help remember it, right? Anybody remember the old XKCD comic for the battery staple? That's my favorite. If you guys haven't seen it, like, share it with your friends. That it's still really accurate, right? That a sentence of basically 4 random words combined together is an amazing password, and it's really hard to forget. So go Google battery staple, and you'll see what I mean if you don't know what I'm talking about. So hunting those weak passwords and using it as a training opportunity, and then fixing misconfigurations, right? Along the way, identify what's exploited. Can we lock down O365 to make it so that we can't add an SMS verification to our own account? There's a lot of additional opportunities on this, right? But those are kind of the obvious ones. And then vulnerability management, so actually patching. We've seen now a number of 0 days. I'm not going to scold any of the companies, but if you're watching vulnerability alerts, right, there's a handful of companies that are popping up again and again and again with critical vulnerabilities. We used to have a 3-day patch time for critical vulnerabilities if they're exploitable. We're doing it now in under 8 hours. Especially if it's internet-facing critical, you've got to get the patches out there right now. You don't have to be the fastest, but you can't be the slowest. Just get it done, right, and finding a way to do it. I'm really grateful that my partners in both kind of infrastructure and on the cloud side understand the risk and are super responsive, and we all have a really good relationship. They're getting these too, and nowadays they're calling me and saying, hey, I just want you to know this patch is going in at 5 o'clock tonight. All right. Like, I don't even have to pick up the phone anymore because we all understand the risk, right? And we're moving quickly on it. So vulnerability management with teeth. And then lastly, attack simulation. And let me save that, and I'll come back to it in a minute. So actually, I'm going to go back. I will say again, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, go do this stuff. If you're not doing this, you shouldn't be focused on much else, right? We talked about physical penetration tests, right? Physical red teaming. Can I go sneak into your place and do bad stuff? If you're not doing this, the bad guys don't need to sneak into your place, right? Why would I use a cloak and dagger dressing up as a HVAC repair person with a rented white box van to show up and walk in looking all official and social engineer your people when I can use a $2 wrench and just break the lock on the door and walk in, right? The bad guys are going to take the easy path. This is the easy path. So this first, then the other stuff. If you're DOD, hopefully you're doing all of this and you have different concerns, right? Okay. How the heck did Mike get approval from his legal department to share all this information? And that's a good question. And number two is, how do we know the attack path so well? It's the same answer to both. And I hate to mislead you guys, but I think it fits better that this was a red team event. It was actually a purple team event. We knew they were coming. We collaborated. But we worked on this one with White Oak Security. I'm not being compensated in any way by White Oak Security. They're just the partner we selected for this one, but they did a really bang-up job. They conducted this whole attack in about 3 days. And that blew me away. This remote access test, I basically said to him, I was like, hey, we can do that, but I think it's a waste of effort. Let's do the assumed breach. Let's give you a laptop and see what you can get to. And on Monday, they call me. They started on Thursday. On Monday, they call me, and they're like, yeah, so we want to try an MFA fatigue attack. Are you okay with that? That means they've already cracked a password, right? I guess we're doing this, right? And they got in. Kudos to them. I didn't believe they could. I got a wake-up call, and we made some really rapid changes. The other reason I can tell you guys all this is that fatigue-resistant MFA, we've got 100% across the board now. We've shut down the attack path. That doesn't mean there's not another one, and we're going to do another red team event this year and every year. And I'm fortunate, right? We're a $12 billion company. We have a sufficient budget and leadership buy-in to do that. But when we keep finding stuff, we're going to keep doing these things, right? Because that's money well spent. So I'm a big believer in that. A couple points on that now that I let you guys know that it's a red team. Mr. Guerin this morning had commented. He showed the breached record numbers, right, on one of his early slides, and that really jumped out at me. So the LinkedIn breach. White Oak, in less than a day, was able to gather 700 login names for my company to password spray. OSINT, right? Open source. That's just public information. That's just stuff that's leaked out there on the dark web, and they went and found it, compiled a list, and could do the attack. If they can do it to me, they can do it to everyone in this room. If somebody comes after your organization and they're a little bit dedicated, they're going to get usernames, and they're going to be able to password spray. Don't underestimate the power of that open source intelligence, and also footprinting your environment, right? They know what your VPN is. They know what you're using. They know everything's got ports and fingerprints exposed to the web, right? So they can figure out your environment. So that jumped out at me, that LinkedIn breach. You're not going to tell your people that they can't use LinkedIn, right? That's unrealistic. So that one really jumped out. And then Mark this morning, when he was presenting, had talked about the importance of red teaming. Just a couple things that I'll add, and I'm not a vendor and I'm not selling anything, so I don't have to be nice about it. And he does. You have to, if you're going to red team, and I've worked in an environment with an amazing red team, and a lot of the time we got the findings or we saw the exploit and it didn't get fixed quickly. So what does that do? It just pisses off the blue team, right? Because they're getting kicked in the shins by the same thing again and again and again. So I think you should red team or do adversarial testing, right? Whether it's red team or purple team. I think a purple team it's collaborative with the blue team. Hey, we're launching this attack. Do you see anything? So that they're communicating and they're learning from each other. So it's not adversarial among the people. They're on the same team trying to secure the organization. It's adversarial that somebody's trying to breach your network. But the blue team is learning. The blue guys and gals. Sorry, not sexist. Don't kneecap the scope. When I talk to these guys, a lot of CISOs will say, yeah, you can throw anything you want at us except no password spraying, no MFA fatigue, right? Okay, so we're going to take half the playbook out and see if you can break in. Don't handcuff the attackers, right? Because the real attackers aren't handcuffed. So that was a big takeaway for us too. And then I already kind of mentioned the physical, right? Don't do physical security testing on your systems, on your IT systems. Physical is important, but if you've got single-factor MFA or single-factor authentication on your remote access platform, that's how they're going to come in, right? Do physical after. So go in order of likelihood of exploit and ease of exploit. All right, let's pivot a little bit. I'm a big sports guy. I play hockey. I scored a beautiful goal top shelf last night. Made me really happy. Woohoo! In the NFL, right, we can watch, and actually the production team here, these guys are phenomenal. They do a lot of sporting stuff, so we were just geeking out about this, right? I come from the era of Chris Carter and the 15-1 Vikings. I still watch, but like that's what I harken back to. I think a lot of people in the room probably remember Chris Carter, where he's running full speed to the sideline, right? The ball's coming in over his shoulder, and he gets right up to the edge, and I'm not going to quite do it all the way that Chris did, but he's like dragging his toes, catching the ball. Okay, maybe I am. And falling on his elbows, right? On the replay today, and I've got a couple pictures that I grabbed like with a 2-second search. You can probably guess which team it is, but I'm not gonna share. The replay is so good that as he's dragging his toe along the ground, you can see the rubber pellets coming up from the ground, from the turf in the air. You know that his feet are in, and it's so beautifully synchronized that you can tell that he's made the catch. It's amazing, right? This technology is out of this world. And I'm a big hockey guy, right? I'll say that a lot. You guys know it about me. But when go Wild. As they're crossing the blue line, right, and the puck's coming to him, you can go frame by frame on the blue line and see if his skate was over the blue line before he had control of the puck, right? It's perfect. It's so amazing how far we've come on that. And yet, I have no idea what happened to MGM or Caesars or Clorox. I have rumor and speculation and back channel information. I might know more than I should about one of the other breaches that's out there, but only because I know half the company is what it feels like, right? And they actually, in Bleeping Computer yesterday, there was an article about single-factor authentication on Citrix being exploited. But the only way we learn this stuff is if somebody gets up and gets ready to get pelted with bread rolls, like me, sharing the results of a red team, right, or getting permission even for that can be difficult, right? That's the only way I get to share this information, or by talking to each other informally, and I've got like some signal chats with other CISOs where we're back channeling on stuff, right? But we have ISACs, but we don't share the dirty laundry. We don't share how we got popped, and we don't learn from each other, and that's super frustrating. And I'm probably not the only one who feels that way. We've got to do better as an industry on learning from our mistakes. If a team, right, if the Vikings can study 80 person hours of film to prepare for a game and know every tendency of that opposing quarterback, why can't we look at breaches for the last 5 years and learn, oh, single-factor authentication was exploited in 80% of them. It's only if we're willing to share. So that's where I'm going to wrap up, is on this vein of how do we learn from each other. Most people are probably familiar with the SEC directive from last year. We wouldn't know the financial impacts of any of those companies on my opening slide without this SEC regulation. We got rumors through like Bitcoin analysis of funds transfers on ransomware before this, right? Oh, Colonial paid $5 million because we can track Bitcoin wallets and see the money because Bitcoin is so traceable. But we don't know how they were popped. We don't know any details, right? And we don't know what the financial impact really was because you can disguise a whole bunch of stuff in a balance sheet on a publicly traded company. Now you have to report. Here's the financial impact, investors, right? It's investor targeted, but those are numbers I can take to my board of directors and I can say, hey, Clorox got hit. They make $7 billion a year. They lost $356 million. All right, let's just do the math, right? Their 7 were 12. If we go down with a major ransomware, it's safe to assume we'll lose $500 million. That's real money, right? That's big money, and that's lives, and that's impact, and that's our business. So we have visibility, thanks to the SEC, into data that we never did before. And I think it's a good start. So kudos to them for taking a stand on this. I'm sure there are a variety, right? The gambit of opinions on regulation. It can be a real pain in the butt, right? If we get breached, we have to report within 4 days of determining materiality. I won't go into the materiality argument, right? But it's super helpful for us to be able to show the true business impact of a ransomware event, not to celebrate it, but to use that to drive budgets and to drive remediation and to do the right thing across our company. There's a CISO regulation. It's proposed right now. We're going to comment on it for critical industry, any company with more than 500 employees in critical industry. Food, obviously food and agriculture, pretty important. At least you realize it's important once you don't see food for a few days. No, it's really critical. So we're critical industry, right? And we're subject to this. This one requires reporting within 72 hours of, what do they say, reasonably believing an event occurred, or within 24 hours of paying a ransom. That's, it's subjective. I think about that. We don't know much 72 hours into an incident a lot of the time. So I think the details of this need to be worked out a little bit. But I think, and I have on my next slide, some ideas on what do we need to see from regulation. This is just me brainstorming in a vacuum. I'd be really interested in hearing what others think on this, because I think we have to get it right to make it both usable and to make it so that we're able to comply with what they've got. I can report within 72 hours, but if you're expecting forensic detail, fat chance, right? Let me tell you that it happened in 72 hours, and I'll keep you in the loop every step of the way. But as the forensics go on over a couple weeks, we're gonna have a much more detailed report, right? So just being sensitive to the realities of our industry and the work that we do. So thoughts on regulation. What does good regulation look like for cyber? I think consistency or consolidation of reporting. So if I need to report to CISA and the SEC, and now say Department of Commerce steps in, or like how many different agencies do I have to report to? What I would like to see, and maybe one of my most important things is, give me a portal where I can report once and y'all can share the information among yourselves. You each get access to the data fields that you need for your agency, because they're not all going to need all the details, right? SEC cares about the financial impact. CIS is going to care about the details because they're trying to mobilize and inform all of us. FBI, I'll throw a plug in here for InfraGard, which I'm getting active in right now. Met with those guys and just applied for, not a job, volunteer position. I'm going to keep my job. But working with InfraGard to try to promote information sharing and better just improvements in our industry. So I'm sure they're going to want information too, right? We had a real incident last year that I can't share much detail of, right? We survived, it was okay. But I had CISA, I called CISA. We reached out to the FBI. I had somebody from Customs and Border Patrol show up at my office. What the heck is ICE doing here, right? They want to be playing cyber too. So we had, shortly into it, we had more help than we knew what to do with from people who didn't really know how to help. So I'm not criticizing. I admire where they're coming from, but that consolidation I think is really important, right? Give me one phone to call. Anonymized sharing. How do we do lessons learned, right? How do we share? Hey, single factor authentication is getting popped left and right. Y'all should do something about that. If we all know that and it's quantifiable, we can use this to improve our frameworks and actually drive concrete action. So I think that one's really important too. And then I think that any kind of punitive impact or punishment for not following the rules needs to be separated, and just thinking about incentives here, from the lessons learned. Because on the one hand, we've got legal departments, and kudos, like they're a good partner. If you're a CISO who's not friends with your legal department, you should be looking for work because they're a critical partner in everything you do. Their job is to limit liability and to protect the company and to protect the brand, and that often looks like sharing as little as possible because that's their job, right? So I think that just as we look at that, we have to separate out the punitive impact of, and I think about PCI, right? Oh, you've been retroactively found non-compliant. We're going to punish you for this with a huge fine. That needs to be separate from the lessons learned because we need to be incentivized to share everything possible so that we can learn from each other's gaps and mistakes. I won't share everything possible if you're going to hit me with a stick for sharing it, right? So I think that's a really important one. I think about that even just as a quick aside on ransomware, right? And the laws about like, hey, we're going to make it illegal to pay a ransom. And I think somebody said this morning, I forget, I wrote down a couple comments, but If we make it illegal to pay a ransom, and I'm a business owner, and let's say I make $500 million a year and I've got 200 employees, and I'm responsible for all of their livelihoods, and I'm forced to a decision of pay this ransom of, I'm gonna make up a number, $20 million to get all my stuff back, or don't pay the ransom, go out of business, all these people don't have jobs anymore, and my company's gone. What do you think I'm gonna take, right? I have to do the right thing. We don't want to force people into a decision where they have to choose between breaking the law and saving their company or following the law and not. Because that's a devil's bargain, right? So, cool. So that's kind of my closing on regulation. I'm curious what others think about this. Hallway conversations or whatever after. If there are things I'm missing here, I'd really like to hear it, because this is just me in a bubble kind of thinking about what incentivizes me. All right, a couple closing thoughts before we go to Q&A. I think we have sufficient time for Q&A. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn and have more conversation, I'll be happy to do that. Talk to me face-to-face first. I have like 1,000 unanswered LinkedIn invitations from business development reps. I just can't handle any more phone calls, right? But if you really want to learn from each other and have a real conversation, I'd love to connect. So talk to me first, or if you look real, which is a really subjective thing, when I look through my LinkedIn tonight, I'll accept if I'm able to. So LinkedIn, I already mentioned InfraGard. CIOs Against Cancer has an auction ending. Thank you. Yeah, let's kill cancer, right? I just got involved with this organization, went to an event last week. I'm in their CISO auction, and there are a lot of great people in that auction. So especially for our vendor partners who are in the room, or your vendor partners, and it doesn't have to be me, right? This isn't an ego thing. This is a really good cause. I lost my dad to cancer 7 years ago. It changed my life. It's one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. We've got 3 hours and 15 minutes until the close of that auction. And a lot of great CIOs and CISOs are in that auction, some of whom will be on the stage later today. Talk to your vendors. Let's bid it up, right? Let's get money to cancer. And it's a great way to get time on my calendar. What I'll say is if I get some really good bids on this one, I'll even go golfing if you want. I'll set aside up to a half day because this is really important. Oh, hey, kudos. Thank you. Yeah, so CIOs Against Cancer on the screen. I have links to the auction as well. If anybody wants it, I can forward you, send you a text or forward you via email. So kudos on that. I'll pause there. For all the numbers and stuff, I have sources. I'm not going to share that here, but if you want to know, hey, where'd you get that number from? I saved all that as well, so I can help with that afterwards. All right, let's break for questions.
Before we go into the general questions from the audience, I have one from the stream. What emerging trends or technologies do you foresee shaping the landscape of cyber incidents in the near future?
It's a tough one. I think it's a cop-out, but multi-cloud. The visibility of using multiple clouds, I think, is a reality for all of us, and the visibility is not where it needs to be yet. So seeing our data move among clouds, I think API intelligence and that non-human identity and access management will be a big deal in the years to come. I also think that we have a lot of basics, right? You guys just saw it. We have a lot of stuff that we can do to prevent attacks. But I also think that the rapid restoration, right? How do we be more resilient to get stuff back online when we do have it? This is a both and, right? It's not an either or. We have to be able to restore quickly. I'm focused on this both in our IT environment and in our OT, our operating technology, which is a very different animal, right? Think about the conveyors, the slicers, the palletizers that are lifting a thing, a robot arm that's making pallets full of food that go out the door. All of that stuff tends to be really capital intensive, meaning it's very, very expensive. You can't replace it every 2 years or 4 years the way you do a computer. Some of those things are 20 years old and highly vulnerable, so how do we secure those? I think OT blast radius effects, and I think OT specific attacks will grow in the years to come as well. Other questions? 2. Go ahead. I'll wait.
Can you comment on where AI might be helping break into companies? I understand, like, phishing is going to be a lot more
That's what I was going to jump on.
a lot more prevalent.
I think we're scratching the surface. So the question was about how might AI be used to break into companies. One thing I didn't reference in this presentation, but I think is a really important thing to be aware of, most of us are in enterprises or fairly big companies. So we hear ransomware all the time, right? That's what we're focused on all the time. I really see AI being used against probably most effectively, although effectively against smaller companies in the shorter term. Generative AI can write really convincing phishing emails, really convincing invoices. So I think that's a huge opportunity, and where I'm going with that is business email compromise. Actually, smaller chunks, but actually had more business loss impact in America last year than ransomware did. And that, what does that look like? A really convincing email coming from a known partner who just had their O365 compromise saying, hey, that $150,000 invoice that I sent you earlier, I gave you the wrong routing number and account number information. Use this instead. I actually had this happen to a client in a previous job that I can't go into detail on, where they got that exact email from a partner they were expecting the invoice from. It was legit, except the routing number and account number were to somebody else's account, and they sent $150,000 and change out the door, and you're not getting it back, right? You wired that money, it's gone. So I think Gen AI and email is a huge area of exploit. That's probably the one that I'd pounce on the most for AI. We were just arguing AI yesterday at my office about like, how much do we talk to the board about this? Because how much of the risk of AI is cyber risk? I'm not saying that's not real, because it's very real. How much of it is business risk, where I'm using this black box AI platform where I'm feeding a bunch of data and it's saying, you should go buy a warehouse in Topeka. I made that up, right? But we go buy a warehouse in Topeka and we find out that the black box AI model was hallucinating about those sheep buying, I don't know, whatever, right? I break down. But I think that a lot of the risks of AI are business risk as well. I think there's cyber and business risk here.
So you talked a lot about password. I wanted to know your thoughts on complex passwords and passphrases.
Like password vaults, 1Pass, that type of stuff?
Yeah, so what would you recommend as a best practice? Would it be a complex password or a long passphrase?
So, yeah, what are my recommendations from a password standpoint? I'll start by saying MFA on everything that matters to you, right? That's more important, almost. So for me, your personal lives now, right? I'll take it out of business and I'll go to personal for a minute. What I do I use KeyPass, and it's open source. I put it on my OneDrive, and I have MFA with an authenticator to get to my OneDrive, to get to anything on my personal O365. And then I have a 25-character password that's a sentence that only means something to me, and my wife knows what it is. It's physically locked in our safe, to open my KeyPass. So I have to jump through a few steps to get to my KeyPass. I randomly generate my passwords for everything that matters, right? Some of my hockey sites, you guys could probably hack into my where I go in to update my roster to say I'm going to play tomorrow or I'm not going to play tomorrow. I use a predictable password that's a joke, right? Because I don't care. You're not going to get anything if you break into that. You're going to mark like, oh, Mike's got beer this week, right? That's about the limit of the damage that you can do on that account. But on my bank accounts, I've got 25-character randomly generated passwords with multi-factor authentication. Any bank, if your bank doesn't require you to have MFA today, you need to find a different bank, right? I'm not aware of any that don't, where they text you a 6-digit code, or hopefully they use Authenticator, which is better and less hackable. So for me, it's KeyPass, cloud storage. I can get to it when I need to, but it's MFA tied to the device that's in my pocket that never leaves my site. Randomly generated, very long passwords for everything that I care about. Other questions? Over here. It's for online, though. They have to be able to hear, too.
So I recently read that CISO's incident reporting guidelines is really broad. Mm-hmm. We did provide feedback. What's your thought? I
don't have I almost pasted it in the appendix so I could jump forward. The question is on CISA's reporting requirements being super broad. I'm not super concrete on it yet, to be honest with you. I have a meeting with my boss, our lead counsel, and our head of legislative affairs next week to talk through it and say, what makes sense here, what doesn't. Let's provide that feedback to CISA. It is really broad, and I think narrowing down the scope of an incident is going to be important. And frankly, I think that if the SEC gives me 4 days from determining materiality, I'd like to see roughly the same timeline requirement. So it's not like, oh, I got 2 days over here, 4 over there, 3 over here, right, from different regulatory agencies. So that consistency, I think, is really important too. Hopefully that answers the question. It's kind of a cop-out, but it's like this long, right? It's hard to comment on it yet. You bet. Any others? All right. Oh, one more.
So I have a heavy SOC incident response background, and I've found in my career that it's been a tough sell to an executive level to say, we want to do threat hunting within our network, and it's a struggle to say, well, you spent a half an hour hunting something down that 9 times out of 10 is nothing. Like, why should we pay you to do that? Do you have any advice on trying to move that ball forward?
Yeah, and so the question is, probably everyone heard it, but how do you make the pitch for threat hunting, right? How do you sell it? We're being transparent in the steps that we're taking. We're using time from existing personnel as they have it. So what I'm doing for next quarter is I'm laying out, we're going to do this test. We're going to look for these things. So I have it well scoped. We're converting to Agile right now. So I have a work ticket or a card, right, a Kanban card in our backlog. And it's when one of these 2 people has a slow week and they are incident responders, one of them they need to partner with infrastructure teams. So that one's going to be a little more scheduled. But some of the others is we're going to take 30 minutes and we're going to go looking. And we're going to report on what we find, even if it's nothing. And it'll be 30 minutes times like 4 different blocks in the quarter. And we're going to report back on what we do find. And I suspect that we're going to find some things that are worthwhile. As soon as you find something that's worthwhile, right? So we're a little off the books on the initial search, but it's not a huge amount of time. It's not a big investment. When you start finding stuff and remediating it, I think that helps build your case for now now we're obligated to do more of this because we're finding ways to exploit our own network. Let's find it before somebody else does. Cool. I think we're one more. Pat? This guy used to play hockey too.
By the way, it's nice to see you again, Mike. So being part of the food service industry, what are some of the unique challenges you have versus manufacturing, finance, healthcare, et cetera?
Yeah, so broader manufacturing, I think a lot of the problems are the same. But when I think about healthcare versus manufacturing, right? So we're food, but I'll use manufacturing in general. So one of the real eye-openers for me going from a healthcare company to a manufacturing company, the big shift is in healthcare, confidentiality is one of the most important things, right? We've got 100 million patient records, right? 100 million records of PHI. So it was very, at least when I was in healthcare, was very confidentiality focused, right? When you think of the CIA triad, confidentiality was kind of first and foremost, and integrity and availability kind of came along behind. In manufacturing, downtime is death, right? I literally have a plant engineer in one of our plants who I met who has a skull and crossbones tattoo on his arm, only it's not crossbones, it's like a wrench and a crowbar. And the words are death before downtime. Like, I kid you not. That is the culture, right? That is the culture of manufacturing. We've got 24/7 manufacturing, right? 3 shifts running a line, it's up 100% of the time. And if it comes down, like I've been told stories about people climbing under conveyors as they're running to swap out hot swap parts that you don't have to stop the line. That is the attitude of availability, right? You have got to be up and running. That was a real eye-opener for me versus, and I won't call out any products, but like And I'll call out one. No, I won't. I can get in trouble. A lot of the recipes for food that you buy in the grocery store, anything, not my food, any food, you give a food scientist with the right tools a couple hours and they can tell you almost everything that's in it and how to make it. That's not rocket science, right? We're not a recipe company, so the recipes they're confidential, but if you have the recipe, you don't have what you need to replace us, because the brand and the trust and the food safety, all the stuff that goes behind it is really what drives the company, right? That when you pluck Planters peanuts or Hormel black label bacon or Spam off the shelf, it's going to be the same within a really tight tolerance every single time. So that availability. I imagine now looking back, so that was, hopefully that answers your question, Pat. That was my experience. I think when in light of the Change Healthcare attack, what we found is that availability in healthcare is, oh my God, important too, right? And I don't think that the systemic impacts of a breach like that well understood, even by me, before that, and now I think like we're at a point where we're never going back. The dependence of the healthcare system, and it's not just healthcare, right? It's all of our systems. We're so tightly integrated. Imagine if Amazon went down, right? If I couldn't get my stuff in 2 days, it's not quite world ending, but it would suck, right? It's a big deal. And think about all the businesses that depend on Amazon to deliver their stuff. I'm not picking on them, right? I'm sure they have great security. But the interdependence of our systems now in this technical age is so tight that, heck, we had riots over toilet paper 4 years ago, right? So it's really, hopefully that helps. All right, I think Kim's gonna kick me off the stage here in 1 minute. So I wanna thank everybody for your time today and attention. Hopefully you got something out of it. Thank you. Thank you. Am I on? I'm on. I'm going to post, these guys got some really good pictures, I hope. I'm going to post on LinkedIn today. This is one of my favorite things to do is sharing information, educating. If you got something out of it, please look for my LinkedIn post and just throw a comment on there and say, hey, great, I really appreciate it, something like that. If you hated it, throw bread rolls at me in the hallway after. But